Are you mocking us? What is this amount? One day I kept getting calls from my parents. When I finally answered the phone, my father's voice thundered through the speaker with unexpected fury. I couldn't make sense of what he was saying through his anger, and confusion washed over me like cold water. What are you talking about? I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. The truth hit me like a slap. They were upset about the money I'd been sending them. Apparently, my sister Samantha had been sending $4,000 every month, while they thought my contribution was a mere 50 cents. That's absolutely not right. I've been sending $4,000 every month faithfully for years, I insisted, gripping the phone tighter. 20 years of monthly payments, 20 years of sacrifice, and this was their response? What? Don't lie to us, Maria. My father's voice cracked with disappointment. Samantha earns more than you with her modeling career and has been sending us $4,000 each month. I'm really disappointed in you. Samantha has always been so smart with her career choices. My mother joined in, her voice carrying that familiar note of comparison that had colored my entire childhood. Are you just enjoying living alone and spending money as you please? You're 48 years old, Maria. Shouldn't you have learned some responsibility by now? Why don't you learn a bit from your sister? She sends us so much of her hard-earned money. You clearly don't care about us at all. Her words ended with that well-practiced sigh that always made me feel 2 inches tall. As usual, my parents gave Samantha all the credit and all the slack. I couldn't process what they were saying. A deep, familiar sadness settled in my chest, that hollow ache that had been my companion since childhood. I couldn't find words to respond. Why would they think I was only sending 50 cents? The absurdity of it would have been laughable if it didn't hurt so much. Despite my frustration and the burning sense of injustice, I decided to follow my parents' lead. Fine, I thought to myself. If they don't appreciate what I've been doing all these years, I'll stop sending money for a while. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating, like jumping from a high dive after decades of standing at the edge. Maria's background: I am Maria, 48 years old, working as a middle manager at a food processing company. There's a 5-year age gap between my sister and me. Samantha has had the face of a model since birth. Everyone who passed by would be captivated by her appearance, often turning to look at her multiple times. Adults invariably praised her, saying, "I have never seen such a gorgeous child." In contrast, I had a more ordinary appearance, so adults often laughed when comparing us, saying, "Maria's face is so plain." My parents believed that Samantha would definitely succeed as a model or actress and adored her beyond reason. On the other hand, their attitude toward me was markedly different, and this disparity had been painfully evident since we were young. When I was in elementary school in the late 1970s, I wore hand-me-downs from neighbors, while Samantha's clothes were always new and reflected the latest trends. Furthermore, I had never taken any lessons, but Samantha started them as soon as she expressed interest in anything: ballet, piano, art classes, whatever caught her fancy. Spoiled by such treatment, Samantha became increasingly entitled as we grew up. "I don't have to lend my things to you, Maria, but it's perfectly fine for me to use your things," she would declare as she took away my cherished possessions one by one. Even when I complained, my parents always defended her, saying, "Samantha is still a child, forgive her." Even when Samantha was clearly in the wrong, they would say, "Let it go, Maria, you're the older sister," dismissing my feelings and refusing to really hear me. I grew weary of Samantha's manipulative ways, yet our parents never corrected her behavior. Sometimes the weight of my parents' obvious favoritism toward my sister would press down on me until I could barely breathe, but I resigned myself to accept it as the way things were. When I was in the upper grades of elementary school, Samantha announced she wanted her own room. Everyone knew that Samantha wouldn't give up until she got her way, so my parents told me, "Maria, move to the living room where your grandparents' portraits are. You don't have many clothes anyway, and it's enough if you have a place to sleep. Reluctantly, I took my bedding to the living room and made my new bedroom there. On the shelf in the living room were pictures of my grandparents, both of whom had passed away when I was young. My grandparents died shortly after Samantha was born. Unlike my parents, my grandparents had cherished me deeply. When I was little, it was my grandfather William who had chosen my name. I was named Maria because I was born during spring when my grandfather's favorite flowers were blooming in the garden. When I was small, I often sat on my grandfather's lap, enveloped in his warmth and unconditional love. I remember grandfather saying, "Maria, no matter how hard things are, you can always overcome them. After that, happiness will come again, just like the flowers returning each spring." Such memories suddenly flooded back as I sat in what was now my bedroom. Even afterward, my parents' treatment of me differed significantly from how they treated Samantha, and I never felt truly at home. As I grew older, I developed a dream of becoming a nurse. I gathered my courage and talked to my parents about wanting to take university entrance exams to fulfill my dream. "There's no way we have the money to send you to university. Get a job after you graduate from high school," they said dismissively. "Maria, you're the older sister, think about Samantha too. We need to save money for Samantha's future." My parents brushed aside my aspirations without any consideration, making university seem like an impossible luxury. However, our family wasn't particularly poor financially. I believe we were solidly middle class. Considering Samantha's future, my parents made do with the bare minimum for me. After high school, while Samantha went on to a prestigious university, I started working at a mid-sized company 3 stations away from home. At that time, I made the difficult decision to move out of my parents' house. I had hoped to stay home and save money until I got married, but I knew that if I stayed, I would continue to feel like an unwelcome guest in my own family. Therefore, I found a reasonably priced studio apartment close to my company. Living alone was liberating, my own space, my own rules, my own peace, since my parents' house had never been a place of comfort for me. Meanwhile, Samantha, carrying all my parents' hopes and dreams, continued to live at home after graduating from university and worked sporadically as a model. She was scouted by a talent agency while shopping with friends during her college years. My parents were ecstatic that Samantha had joined a talent agency, and bragging about her became part of their daily routine, even to complete strangers. The financial arrangement: one day in my early 30s, Samantha called me, talking about expressing gratitude to our parents. "All that we sisters have achieved is thanks to Dad and Mom. From now on, let's repay them for raising us," Samantha said cheerfully and energetically. It seemed that Samantha, who used to only care about herself, had really matured. "I've been thinking about what we can do for Mom and Dad. After all, money might be the most helpful. How about giving them about $4,000 a month?" $4,000? Isn't that an awful lot? I was taken aback by the amount suggested. Modeling must really pay well, I thought, though something in her too bright voice made me hesitate. "I think Mom and Dad would be surprised if they got that much money from us. I want to surprise them soon, so let's start this month." Although I was somewhat skeptical, I had heard that our parents were struggling financially because they had spent so much on us. They claimed they were burdened with debt, so I decided to accept Samantha's suggestion, despite my reservations. However, I was barely making ends meet myself. To send $4,000, I would have to significantly dip into my savings. My monthly salary was about $3,000. Even if I lived on $1,000, I would still be $2,000 short each month. Therefore, I took a weekend security guard job at a construction site. The pay was decent, but the work was physically demanding in ways my desk job wasn't. In summer, I endured the scorching heat, and in winter, the biting cold. I thought about quitting many times when my body ached and my eyes struggled to stay open during my regular job. However, the people I worked with unexpectedly treated me with kindness, often buying me drinks and snacks because they thought I was doing well. To save on expenses, I limited eating out as much as possible and cut unnecessary spending to the bone, but $4,000 was still a stretch every month. How could I earn more money? I need a certification to advance my career, I decided after much thought. I devoted myself to studying for a healthcare management certification during the precious few hours I had between jobs, sparing no time for sleep or relaxation. Days of being chased by work and studies blurred together in an exhausting race. Around that time, I received a call from my parents. Busy as I was with my multiple jobs and studies, I couldn't answer right away, and they left several missed calls. Sorry, I couldn't pick up sooner. Did something happen? I finally managed to return their call, my voice betraying my exhaustion. The first words that hit me were, "You are horrible. What do you think of us?" I could hear my father's angry voice on the other end of the phone. Behind him, I could also hear my mother agreeing vehemently, saying, "Really, Maria, really?" I had no idea why they were so angry. "Are you mocking us?" "What is this amount?" my father demanded. "What do you mean? Are you talking about the money I send?" I was confused and couldn't understand what had triggered their anger. "Do you know how much Samantha is sending?" $4,000. "And you send just 50 cents? Are you mocking us?" My father's shout made me hold the phone away from my ear. "That's impossible. I've been sending $4,000 every month faithfully," I repeated firmly, stunned by my father's accusation. "What? Don't lie. Samantha earns more than you from her successful modeling career, so she's the one sending us $4,000 every month. I'm really disappointed in you." "Samantha is so smart and successful," my father expressed his displeasure, his voice dripping with comparison. My mother also joined in the criticism. "Are you just enjoying living alone and spending money as you please? Why don't you learn a bit from your sister? She sends us so much money she's earned." "You don't care about us at all," she said with that familiar sigh. What was happening? I couldn't understand what my parents were saying and felt utterly confused, a wave of sadness washing over me. Words failed me. Previously, Samantha had suggested, "Since it's from both of us, let's keep it a secret and use the name Rainbow when we send the money." At that time, I didn't know that Samantha's stage name was Rain, and it turned out that the name used for sending the 50 cents was under my name, Maria. My parents believed that Samantha was the one depositing $4,000, and before I could explain, they yelled, "We don't need such a mocking amount of 50 cents from you," and hung up the phone. A bitter feeling toward Samantha for setting me up consumed me. That night, I couldn't sleep at all, my mind a storm of complex emotions. 20 years of working multiple jobs, of sacrificing my own comfort and time, of putting their needs before mine, and this was how they saw me. I lay awake wondering whether I should continue sending money in this situation. Jennifer's advice, the next day, I decided to talk to my high school friend, Jennifer, who works at a financial consulting firm. Jennifer had always been very capable at her job and has been a reliable and justice-minded woman since our high school days. At 47, she had risen to a senior position through hard work and sharp instincts. I've always found her trustworthy because she gives frank opinions when consulted. Fortunately, her workplace was nearby, and we were able to meet for lunch during our break. "I was surprised when you said you needed to talk so urgently. What happened, Maria? You look exhausted," she said, studying my face with concern over her stylish reading glasses. "I need to talk about something concerning my family," I began, my voice smaller than I intended. I told her about the recent events, the years of sending money, Samantha's suggestion, the angry phone call. Jennifer listened attentively, occasionally nodding, her expression growing more troubled as I went on. After hearing my story, Jennifer asked pointedly, "Are your parents really struggling financially? They're in their early 70s, right? Robert must have a pension from his pharmaceutical job." She was also visibly shocked by the amount of $4,000. They say they have debts from raising us. Samantha suggested that we send money to our parents to show our gratitude, I explained, though the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. Jennifer looked at me directly, her eyes sharp with concern. You say it's money spent on both of you, but you didn't even go to university until you paid for night school yourself, right? Isn't it mostly money spent on Samantha? And isn't your dad receiving his pension? There's no need to send $4,000 monthly. It's hard to believe they suddenly need that much when they've been living comfortably all this time. If they say your contribution is just 50 cents, why not stop the payments like they suggested? I found myself nodding in agreement with Jennifer's practical advice. You're too kind, Maria. You've always put everyone else first. You shouldn't let yourself be pushed around anymore, especially at our age. Jennifer's words resonated with something deep inside me. What am I to my family after all these years? I shouldn't just do as they say without question, I reminded myself. Not anymore, not at 48. The revelation, 2 months later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing from early morning. Thinking it might be an emergency, I answered, only to hear Samantha's angry voice. Why haven't you been answering the phone all morning? And why did you stop sending money on your own? What were you thinking? Samantha shouted, her anger apparent even through the phone. I'm already overwhelmed with my own life, Samantha, I said, surprising myself with my calm tone. I was told our parents were struggling because suddenly there was no $4,000 coming in, but I've learned that the money was turning into your pride and our parents' wasteful spending. Actually, Jennifer and a friend of Samantha's were acquaintances, and I had heard this from Jennifer. Jennifer has an extensive professional network and had been discreetly asking around on my behalf. I had always suspected something wasn't right about this arrangement. Jennifer also discovered that Samantha spends quite lavishly on designer clothes, expensive cosmetics, and regular spa treatments. Hearing this from Jennifer, anger welled up inside me, not the fleeting kind, but a deep, smoldering rage that had been building for decades. Even though I was cutting back on necessities and working myself to exhaustion, Samantha had been telling her friends, my big sister is my source of funds, so I rely on her money. Lately, I've been struggling because I don't have money from my sister. I might have to cut back on facials and cosmetics for a while. Then I discovered that my mother was buying luxury brand purses, and my father was not going to work but gambling instead with my hard-earned money. It felt absurd and infuriating to support my parents' and sister's extravagant lifestyles with money I had sacrificed so much to earn. Do you think I don't know Dad receives a pension? So my money isn't needed for necessities, is it? I declared, my voice stronger than it had ever been when speaking to my family. The confrontation, a week passed in tense silence. By then, I had learned the whole truth from various sources. Next, my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced. The $4,000 payments had stopped, and it seems Samantha had finally told them the truth when they pressed her. I can't afford such money, she had apparently revealed through tears. Samantha had been telling our parents that she was earning a high income as a model, but in reality, she wasn't making any significant money at all and was becoming a burden to her agency. Samantha only worked as a model occasionally. Though still attractive at 43, she had no particular talent in singing or dancing and nothing outstanding to offer, which made it difficult for her to succeed in the competitive entertainment industry. Her jobs were low-paying, such as modeling for inexpensive online shopping catalogs. All this came to light when our parents finally confronted her. We've been strict with Samantha about her deception, my father said, standing awkwardly in my modest but neat living room. You don't need to worry and can continue sending money as before. Of course, there was no apology for accusing me of lying or for the years of favoring Samantha. We've been preparing for these past 2 months, so please deposit the money when you can. You're reliable after all, my parents brazenly demanded the 2 months of payments I had stopped, as if it was their due. Their sense of entitlement knew no boundaries. I heard from Samantha that you had some debt. Is that true? I asked directly, something I had been wondering about for years but never had the courage to question. Debt? There's no way. We covered Samantha's tuition with your grandparents' inheritance, my father stated matter-of-factly. I felt the blood drain from my face. Samantha's claims about our parents having debt and needing money were entirely false, just as I had begun to suspect. We just need a bit more for shopping since your father's pension isn't enough for the lifestyle we're accustomed to, my mother said nonchalantly, adjusting her new designer watch. It was crystal clear that my parents had enough money for a comfortable lifestyle, they just wanted more luxury than they could afford on their own. Father's pension should be more than adequate for your needs. Besides, why doesn't Samantha get a full-time job somewhere instead of clinging to a modeling career that isn't working out? When I firmly said this, challenging them for the first time in my life, my father's face darkened with anger. Is that how you talk to your own parents? I didn't raise a daughter to act like this. He snapped, as if I were still a child to be scolded. My mother followed with equal indignation. We don't need a daughter like you. They looked at me with disappointment, as if I had failed some fundamental test of daughterhood. If you're going to be like that, we'll just use the savings your grandfather left for you. You're no longer part of this family. Shockingly, my parents threatened to use the money my grandfather had specifically left for me, money I hadn't even known existed until that moment. Do as you like, but from now on, don't contact me again. I made my decision, realizing I didn't want to be treated as a convenient ATM by my parents and Samantha anymore. When they finally left, storming out with threats and accusations, tears spilled from my eyes. What had I ever been to my family except a resource to be used? The turning point, 2 months passed in blessed silence. Then suddenly, the doorbell rang one Sunday afternoon. There at my door stood my parents and Samantha, looking significantly less polished than the last time I'd seen them. I thought I would never see them again, but I reluctantly opened the door. I was puzzled by the worn appearance of my parents and Samantha, and they too seemed surprised by my appearance. What's with that new look? With puzzled faces, my parents and Samantha asked since I had become more confident in my appearance and was wearing better quality clothing than before. I finally completed my healthcare management certification that I've been studying for. Thanks to the certification and Jennifer's recommendation, my salary improved substantially with my promotion at work. I'm now leading the corporate wellness team as a department head. The company headquarters is a bit far from here, so I'm planning to move to a nicer apartment closer to work, I explained calmly, noticing their eyes widening as I spoke. Before you indulge in such luxuries, give us some money. They demanded without preamble. Are you planning to abandon your struggling family? Just lend us some money, they pleaded, their tone shifting from demanding to desperate in an instant. The three of them spoke over each other, saying whatever they thought might convince me to open my wallet. Disgusted with my parents and Samantha, who started demanding money as soon as they realized my income had increased, I said firmly, with Dad's pension and Samantha's income, you could live comfortably if you managed your money responsibly. In reality, Samantha hardly had any work anymore. The modeling world is brutal for women over 40. What would you know, big sister? Samantha appealed with a voice on the verge of tears. The radiant appearance she once had was faded, replaced by too much makeup trying to hide the effects of stress and poor choices. Samantha, who was struggling in her career, had been scouted by another talent agency that claimed she was perfectly suited to be a mature actress. She decided to borrow money from our parents and invest in joining this new agency. However, a large sum was required to join, and our father even used his early retirement severance pay to help her, but it turned out to be a complete scam. After paying the money, suddenly no one from the agency could be contacted. Shockingly, no formal contract had even been signed. I was dumbfounded by such reckless financial behavior from people in their 40s and 70s. Before you come to me for a bailout, you should report this fraud to the police, I advised, knowing it was probably too late to recover their money. Right after saying this, someone knocked at my door. It was a representative from a consumer finance company. Are you family? It seemed they had followed my parents to my address. I discovered that my parents and sister had borrowed a large amount of money, betting everything on Samantha's non-existent acting career. Moreover, Samantha had been working occasionally at a nightclub to relieve stress and make ends meet. As a result, they were completely out of money and deeply in debt. Despite having no real income, my parents had chased dreams of luxury and gambling, ultimately losing everything. I was thoroughly dismayed by their continued poor judgment. When the consumer finance representative asked if I was related to them, I made my final decision. I don't know these people at all. I have nothing to do with them, and I closed the door on that chapter of my life. Later, I heard that my parents filed for bankruptcy, and their debt was temporarily cleared. They sold their house and now live in a modest apartment. Both of my parents got jobs through a temporary agency and seem to be managing their lives more responsibly out of necessity. Ironically, the construction site where I used to work part-time was apparently my father's new assigned workplace through the temp agency. I'll be in your care starting today, my former supervisor had told my father on his first day. Ah, it's the old man. Help me out. There used to be a young lady here before, but she quit. She worked hard and earned money to send to her parents. I'd like to see the face of parents who make their middle-aged daughter work on a construction site. My father's face had reportedly stiffened with shame when he realized the connection. Samantha gave up on modeling completely and continued working in nightlife, but her self-centered personality led to her being unwelcome by customers. She was fired from nightclubs and lounges one after another, eventually managing to earn her living expenses at a small bar. Her appearance changed dramatically due to increased drinking and stress. Among the regulars at the bar, her stories about once being a model seemed like mere fantasy. A model? Who are you kidding? Look in the mirror, she was mocked for how much her body and face had changed. New beginnings, I have cut ties with my parents and sister, and for the first time in my life, I am truly enjoying my days. 5 years have passed since then, and today I was attending Jennifer's wedding. At 52, I felt more comfortable in my own skin than I ever had in my youth. The wedding was held in a beautiful chapel in Miami overlooking the sea. Before me, the blue sea and sky stretched endlessly. The atmosphere was filled with a sense of expansive possibility. Next to Jennifer, her new husband stood smiling, a solid, kind-looking man in his early 50s. A new life was growing between them. Jennifer had always seemed to be focusing exclusively on her career, but she had been quietly dating a colleague from another department for the past few years. I achieve everything I want on my own terms. I discard what doesn't serve me without regret. Maria, you should also continue to face your true feelings and needs, Jennifer said with a smile that radiated genuine happiness. Her husband standing beside her laughed affectionately. Don't throw me away, okay? I'm really grateful to you, Jennifer. Be happy, I responded with the biggest, most genuine smile I could remember giving. Jennifer's wedding was a special day for this woman who had helped me find my freedom, so I celebrated with heartfelt gratitude for our friendship. As the wedding reception was drawing to a close, a man appeared, slightly out of breath from rushing to arrive. Apparently, he was a friend of the bride and groom who had been delayed by work. Jennifer introduced him as David, a 53-year-old architect who owned his own firm. He was tall, well-built, with salt and pepper hair and laugh lines that suggested a life well lived. When he smiled, it reached his eyes in a way that made me want to know what had put that warmth there. I wanted to introduce David to you, Maria. Your personalities are remarkably similar, both of you have that rare combination of kindness and strength, Jennifer said, clearly playing matchmaker with no subtlety whatsoever. Finding Jennifer's transparent attempt amusing, both David and I couldn't help but laugh together. Afterward, David and I found ourselves deep in conversation, discovering shared interests and similar life philosophies. We decided to continue our talk over dinner the following weekend. As we made plans, I felt a gentle warmth spreading through me, like spring flowers finally blooming after a long winter. From now on, I plan to enjoy both my work and the possibility of new love, living life fully on my own terms. Grandpa William, please keep watching over me from wherever you are. I'm finally blooming, just as you always said I would. I sat in my rented apartment looking around at my few belongings scattered across the room: the small bookshelf with my well-worn cookbook collection, the second-hand coffee table I'd found at a thrift store years ago, the potted herbs on the windowsill that my coworker Linda had given me as a housewarming gift. Not much to show for 45 years of life, but as I took it all in, a smile spread across my face, tinged with both regret and hope. I felt free. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my small kitchen, where no one would complain about the lingering aromas of my experimental recipes or rush me to prepare their meals. I ran my fingers along the spine of my favorite Italian cookbook, the pages dog-eared and stained from years of secret consultation. My heart swelled with a bittersweet mixture of emotions: joy at my newfound independence, regret that it had taken me so long to claim it. Better at 45 than never, I whispered to myself, the words hanging in the quiet air. To understand how I got here, though, you'd have to go back 17 years. That's when everything changed. That's when I was 28 and my mother got sick. 17 years earlier, I remember the day as clearly as if it were yesterday. The acceptance letter from the Culinary Institute lay open on my kitchen table, the official letterhead gleaming in the morning light. I couldn't stop reading it, my fingers tracing over the words that promised a future I'd dreamed of since childhood. "You're going to be amazing, Sarah," I told myself, allowing a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. At 28, after years of saving tips from the local cafe and practicing recipes late into the night, I was finally going to become a real chef. The phone rang, shattering my reverie. My father's voice trembled on the other end. "Sarah, it's Mom. She's collapsed. We're at Memorial Hospital." The world tilted beneath my feet. I arrived at the hospital within 20 minutes, my acceptance letter forgotten on the table. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor seemed to buzz with an ominous intensity as I rushed toward my mother's room. My father, Robert, stood outside the door, his normally commanding accountant's posture now stooped with worry. At 70, his hair had gone completely white, but his eyes still carried that same stern expectation they always had when looking at me. "The doctor says it's her heart," he said without preamble. "She'll need care for months, maybe longer." My younger siblings, Jessica and Michael, the twins, stood against the far wall, looking lost. At 28, the same age as me, they had the wide-eyed expression of children, despite their designer clothes and carefully styled appearances. "What about her medication?" Michael asked, glancing at his watch. "I have a meeting I can't miss, and I'm supposed to fly to Chicago tomorrow," Jessica added, her manicured fingers already tapping at her phone. I stepped into my mother's room. Carol looked smaller somehow, diminished against the white hospital sheets. Her hand, when I took it, felt papery and fragile. "Sarah," she whispered, a faint smile crossing her face. "My reliable girl." 3 days later, we gathered in the hospital cafeteria for what my father called a family meeting. The twins fidgeted, checking their phones, while Dad laid out the situation with the clinical precision of the accountant he'd been for 4 decades. "Your mother will need round-the-clock care for at least 6 months, he explained. "The medication makes her dizzy. She can't be left alone." Jessica looked up from her phone. "We can hire someone, right?" "Insurance won't cover it," Dad replied. And a full-time nurse would cost more than we can afford right now. All eyes turned to me. I felt the weight of their expectations settle on my shoulders like a familiar, heavy coat. "Sarah," my father said, his tone making it clear this wasn't really a question, "you're not married, you don't have children. Your job at the cafe is flexible." He said this last word as if my years of hard work were merely a hobby. "Your mother needs you." I felt the acceptance letter burning in my mind. The classes started in 2 weeks. I was planning to attend culinary school, I said, my voice sounding small even to my own ears. I got accepted. Full scholarship. There was a moment of silence, then my mother reached across the table and patted my hand. "Oh, sweetheart, that's lovely. But surely that can wait? This is just temporary." "Just until Mom recovers," Dad added. "Family comes first, Sarah. You know that." I could delay my Chicago transfer, Jessica offered, not quite meeting my eyes. "For a week or 2. And I could come by on weekends," Michael said, though we all knew his weekends were usually spent with friends or on camping trips with his tech industry colleagues. I looked from face to face as my frail mother, my authoritative father, my self-absorbed siblings, and felt my dream slipping away, like sand through my fingers. "Of course I'll help," I heard myself say. "It's just temporary. I can defer for a semester." Relief washed over their faces, and I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. "Just temporary," I told myself. "Just a few months." But deep down, I already sensed the truth. Some sacrifices, once made, become permanent before you even realize what you've lost. The sacrifice extends, what began as temporary stretched into a way of life. My mother's recovery was slower than expected, complicated by secondary infections and her stubborn refusal to follow the doctor's orders when I wasn't watching. 6 months became a year. My culinary school deferment expired, the scholarship lost. The cafe owner, Tom, kept my job open, his kind eyes watching me with a mixture of sympathy and concern as I arrived for early shifts with dark circles under my eyes. "You look exhausted, Sarah," he said one morning as I fumbled with the coffee machine. "How's your mom doing?" "Better," I said automatically, the answer I'd been giving for months. "She can get around the house now, at least." Tom leaned against the counter, his 60-year-old face creased with the wisdom of someone who'd seen too many lives derailed by obligation. "And that school you were going to attend? The cooking one?" I focused intently on measuring coffee grounds. I missed the enrollment deadline. Maybe next year. But next year brought new challenges. Dad's arthritis worsened, requiring more help around the house. The twins graduated college and moved back home temporarily while looking for jobs that somehow always seemed to be in other cities, requiring frequent trips for interviews, leaving me to manage the household. By my 35th birthday, 7 years into my temporary arrangement, I had settled into a routine that felt both numbing and inescapable. Wake at 5 a.m. Prepare breakfast for Dad, who still expected it at precisely 6:30. Clean the kitchen. Help Mom with her exercises. Drive to the cafe for my shift. Return home to cook dinner. Clean up. Fall into bed. Repeat. My paychecks went mostly to my parents, with Dad overseeing the household finances as he always had. "We're a family," he would say whenever I brought up keeping more for myself. "We all contribute according to our abilities." Yet somehow, Jessica's marketing job and Michael's IT position never seemed to require the same level of contribution. Their salaries funded new cars, vacations, and graduate degrees. Meanwhile, I wore clothes until they frayed and saved for months to replace my worn-out shoes. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I dragged myself home to find my parents and the twins seated at the dining table, a heated discussion in progress. "There she is," a mom said as I entered, her tone immediately shifting to one of expectation. Sarah, we were just discussing dinner. We thought you might make that chicken dish everyone likes. I stood in the doorway, my body aching from a 10-hour shift. The kitchen was untouched, dishes from lunch still piled in the sink despite 3 able-bodied adults having been home all afternoon. I'm exhausted, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Couldn't someone else cook tonight? Or we could order something? The silence that followed was deafening. My father's eyebrows rose in disapproval. Mom looked genuinely bewildered, as if I'd suggested something outlandish. But you're the cook in the family, Jessica said, not unkindly, but with the unthinking privilege of someone who had never questioned her place. And you make it so much better than anyone else. I've had calls all day, Michael added, waving his hand toward his laptop. Client emergency. I could help, Mom offered, but you know the doctor said I shouldn't stand too long. I looked at them, really looked at them, and for perhaps the first time saw clearly what I had become in their eyes, not a daughter or sister with dreams of her own, but a function. A role. The reliable one who would always fill the gaps, no matter the cost to herself. Fine, I said quietly, setting down my bag and moving toward the kitchen. I'll make dinner. But as I pulled ingredients from the refrigerator, something shifted inside me, a small spark of resentment that would smolder for years, waiting for the right moment to ignite into flame. The turning point at the restaurant, by the time I turned 40, my life had settled into a pattern so familiar I rarely questioned it anymore. The dreams of culinary school had faded to a dull ache I only acknowledged late at night, when I would sometimes page through my collection of cookbooks, imagining a different life. Tom, the cafe owner, noticed the change in me over the years, how my once enthusiastic experimentation with the daily specials had given way to mechanical efficiency. Sarah, he said one rainy afternoon as we closed up, you're one of the hardest workers I've ever known, but when's the last time you did something for yourself? I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. What's that supposed to mean? Tom leaned against the counter, his weathered face serious. My cousin Joseph owns that Italian place downtown, Mezzanotte. He's looking for experienced kitchen staff. I'm not experienced, I said automatically. I just work in a cafe. You've been creating recipes and feeding people for 15 years, Tom countered. And I've seen what you can do with flavors. Joseph's place is the real deal, white tablecloths, authentic cuisine. The pay is better too. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't experienced in years, possibility. I don't know, Tom. My schedule at home is pretty fixed. My parents rely on me. He sighed, pushing a business card across the counter. Just think about it. Joseph's a good man. He values talent. I slipped the card into my pocket, expecting it to join the graveyard of discarded opportunities that had defined my late 30s. But that night, as I scrubbed pans while the rest of the family watched television, I found myself pulling out the card, running my fingers over the embossed lettering. To my own surprise, I called the next day. 2 weeks later, I was working evening shifts at Mezzanotte, coming home exhausted but with a spark rekindled behind my eyes. Joseph Ricci was unlike any boss I'd ever had. At 55, with salt and pepper hair and hands scarred from decades of kitchen work, he ran his restaurant with passion and precision. He didn't just give orders, he taught, demonstrated, expected excellence. Your knife skills are good, he told me on my 3rd week, watching me prep vegetables, but you're too tentative. Like you're afraid to commit. He demonstrated the proper technique, his knife a blur of confident motion. At home, my new schedule created tension. We hardly see you anymore, Mom complained when I missed Sunday dinner for the 3rd week in a row. The family's not the same without you here. I'm still here every morning, I reminded her. I still do the shopping, the cleaning, the laundry. But it's not the same, she insisted, her eyes narrowing slightly. This restaurant job, it's taking up so much of your time. Is it really necessary? I didn't have the courage to tell her how alive I felt in Joseph's kitchen, how the rhythms of a professional restaurant awakened something in me I thought had died years ago. Instead, I said, the money's better. It helps with the household expenses. That, at least, was an argument my parents understood, though my father insisted that my contribution to the household increase proportionally with my new salary. One evening, 6 months into my new job, Joseph called me into his office after the dinner service. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. The office was small, the walls covered with family photos and framed reviews. My stomach tightened. Was this it? Had I finally reached the limit of my minimal training? Was he letting me go? "You've been here half a year," Joseph said, studying me with those perceptive eyes. "You're punctual, hardworking, and you've got good instincts. But you hold back." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. "I'm still learning." "No, it's more than that. You cook like someone who's afraid to take up space." He leaned forward. "I've watched you create specials when you think no one's looking. They're good, creative, balanced. But when I ask if you have ideas to contribute, you clam up." I stared at my hands, unsure how to respond. "Sarah, I'm offering you a chance," he continued. "Weekend dinner service. We do a chef's special, your recipes, your execution. You'd be responsible for creating a new dish each weekend. If they sell well, we'll talk about making it permanent. And I'll pay for professional training. There are excellent weekend courses at the community college." My heart raced, a kaleidoscope of emotions swirling through me, excitement, fear, and underneath it all, a guilty sense that I was somehow betraying my family by wanting this so badly. "I don't know if I can commit to weekends," I said, thinking of the family dinners, the Sunday cleaning, the countless small tasks that filled my weekend hours. Joseph's expression was knowing. "Family obligations?" I nodded. "Let me tell you something, Sarah. I grew up in a traditional Italian family, lots of expectations, lots of pressure to be what everyone else needed. But at some point, you have to ask yourself, when do I get to be who I need to be?" He tapped his desk for emphasis. "Think about it. The offer stands." I walked home that night, my mind churning. The city streets glistened from a recent rain, reflecting the neon signs and streetlights in shimmering pools. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a different future, one where I created food that moved people, where I developed my own style, my own voice. By the time I reached our house, my decision was made. I would take Joseph's offer, regardless of the pushback from my family. At 45, it was time to claim at least a small piece of my life for myself. What I didn't know then was that another event was about to push me toward an even bigger decision, one that would finally break the chains I'd wrapped around myself for nearly 2 decades. The pivotal dinner, the invitation to the twins' 28th birthday dinner, arrived via a text message from my mother, reservations at Le Chateau for 7 p.m. Jessica and Michael's special day. Wear something nice. Something nice. I stared at my closet that evening, fingers trailing over the sparse selection of nice clothes I owned. Nothing compared to what Jessica would wear. She always appeared in the latest fashion, courtesy of her marketing job and our parents' generosity. I finally settled on a navy blue dress I'd bought 3 years ago for a cousin's wedding, smoothing the wrinkles as best I could. Le Chateau was one of the most expensive restaurants in town, with white tablecloths and crystal stemware that reflected the soft lighting. I arrived exactly at 7, having rushed from my shift at Mezzanotte, where Joseph had allowed me to leave early for the special family occasion. They were already seated at a round table near the window, my parents, Jessica, Michael, and Michael's girlfriend Amber, a willowy blonde who worked at his tech company. My mother waved me over with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sarah, finally. We were about to order wine without you." "Sorry," I said, slipping into the empty chair between Dad and Jessica. The restaurant was busy. Always working, Jessica said with a laugh, patting my hand. Her engagement ring, new, I noticed, caught the light and scattered it like tiny stars. You should learn to delegate more. I bit back the response that rose to my lips, that I wasn't the manager, just a line cook desperately trying to learn everything I could. Instead, I smiled and reached for the water glass. Happy birthday, both of you, I said. 28. I can't believe it. 28. The same age I had been when Mom got sick, when my culinary school dreams evaporated like morning dew. I felt a strange disconnection, as if watching the scene from above. Here were my siblings at the exact age I had been when my life's trajectory changed forever, celebrating in a restaurant finer than any I'd ever dined in as a customer. Dinner progressed with the usual family dynamics. Dad dominated the conversation with stories from his consulting work. Mom fussed over the twins, asking detailed questions about Jessica's marketing campaigns and Michael's latest tech project. When the conversation turned to me, it was brief. "Sarah's still at that Italian place," Mom said in response to Amber's polite inquiry about my job. "It's keeping her busy." "Too busy," Dad added. "We hardly see her anymore." I sipped my wine, a luxury I rarely allowed myself. "Joseph has been giving me more responsibility," I said. "I'm creating weekend specials now." "That's wonderful," Amber said, seeming genuinely interested. "It's just part-time," Mom clarified quickly. "Sarah's main priority is still helping at home, of course." The waiter arrived with the main courses, elaborately plated dishes that made me study the techniques with professional interest. As we ate, my father cleared his throat and tapped his knife against his glass. "Carol and I have an announcement," he said, his face more animated than I'd seen in years. "In honor of the twins' birthday, we've made some decisions about their future." My mother beamed, reaching out to clasp first Jessica's hand, then Michael's. "We're so proud of both of you. Your careers are taking off, and you deserve every opportunity to succeed." Dad nodded. "That's why we've decided to provide each of you with an advancement fund. Jessica, for your MBA at Northwestern." Jessica squealed, clapping her hands together. "Oh my God, really? I can't believe it. I was so worried about the loans." "And Michael," Dad continued, "for your tech startup incubator program in Austin." Michael's face broke into a huge grin. "Seriously? That's incredible. Thank you." I sat frozen, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth. The MBA program and the incubator, they had to cost at least $50,000 each. More than I earned in a year. More than I had saved in my entire life. "A toast," Mom said, raising her glass. "To our brilliant children and their bright futures." Glasses clinked around the table. I raised mine automatically, the wine suddenly tasteless in my mouth. "Sarah," my mother said, turning to me with that expectant look I knew so well, "would you mind cutting the cake when it arrives? You're so much better at making those perfect slices." Something cracked inside me, a hairline fracture in the foundation of resignation I'd built over 17 years. I looked at Jessica and Michael, both glowing with excitement about their futures. The same excitement I had felt at 28, before it was extinguished by family obligation. Of course, I heard myself say, my voice steady despite the storm building inside. "I always do." Later, as I carefully divided the elaborate birthday cake, a 3-tiered creation with fondant decorations, I felt the weight of every decision I'd never made, every opportunity I'd sacrificed. Jessica and Michael, at 28, were being launched into their dreams with enthusiastic support. I, at 45, was still cutting the cake and cleaning up afterward. The realization didn't come as a lightning bolt but as a quiet, undeniable truth. Nothing would change unless I changed it. And for the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge that I needed change. As we left the restaurant, Jessica hugged me tightly. "Thanks for always being there, Sarah. You're the best big sister." I hugged her back, surprised to find that I didn't resent her. This wasn't her fault, or Michael's. They had simply grown up in the reality our parents created, one where Sarah was the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who would always sacrifice. Enjoy your MBA, I said, meaning it. You're going to be amazing. On the drive home, I called Linda, my coworker from Mezzanot, the only person who had become a true friend in recent years. A divorced mother of two, Linda had rebuilt her life after her marriage ended, balancing single parenthood with a career she loved. "Can I come over?" I asked when she answered. "I need to talk." An hour later, sitting at Linda's kitchen table with a glass of cheap red wine, I told her everything about the culinary school acceptance 17 years ago, about the years of giving my salary to my parents, about the twins' birthday dinner and the advancement funds. Linda listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finally fell silent, she reached across the table and gripped my hand. "Sarah," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "do you realize what's happening here? This isn't normal. This isn't what family is supposed to be." "They need me," I said automatically, the response worn smooth from years of repetition. "Do they?" Linda challenged. "Or have they just gotten used to having you as their personal chef, housekeeper, and ATM? The twins are adults. Your parents are capable. They've survived for months with you working evenings." I stared into my wine glass, watching the light refract through the deep red liquid. "What am I supposed to do? Just walk away after all these years?" "Not just walk away," Linda corrected. "Start living. You're 45, Sarah, not 85. You could have 30 more years of career ahead of you. Are you going to spend it making other people's dreams come true at the expense of your own?" The question hung in the air between us, demanding an answer I wasn't sure I was brave enough to give. The decision, I didn't sleep that night, my mind replaying Linda's words on an endless loop as I tossed and turned. By dawn, I had made a decision that both terrified and exhilarated me. I would leave. I would finally put myself first. Morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains, the same faded floral pattern that had hung there since I was in high school. I ran my hand over the familiar crack in the ceiling, tracing its path as I had thousands of times before. But today was different. Today would be the last time. I waited until everyone had left, Dad to his weekly golf game, Mom to her book club, the twins to their respective jobs. Then I pulled my rarely used suitcases from the attic and began to pack. 17 years in this house as an adult, and my possessions fit into 2 suitcases and a few boxes. My cookbooks took up more space than my clothes. As I folded sweaters and packed away the few mementos I wanted to keep, I found myself talking aloud, rehearsing what I would say when they returned. "I've given 17 years of my life to this family. I put my dreams on hold when you needed me, Mom. I worked jobs I didn't love to support this household, Dad. I've been patient, reliable Sarah for so long that I've forgotten who I am beyond that role." My hands trembled as I placed the last cookbook into a box. Was I really doing this? Could I actually walk away from the only life I'd known as an adult? The answer came with surprising clarity: I had to. If I didn't leave now, at 45, I never would. I called Joseph at the restaurant, heart pounding as I explained that I needed a few days off for a personal emergency. His response surprised me. "Take the time you need, Sarah. And when you come back, I want to discuss expanding your role here. Your special last weekend, the wild mushroom risotto, customers have been asking for it again." Pride bloomed in my chest, fragile but unmistakable. Then I called Linda. "I'm doing it," I said when she answered. "I'm leaving." There was a moment of silence, then, "Good for you, Sarah. I mean it. My spare room is yours for as long as you need it." By 3 o'clock, my car was packed. I took one last look around my bedroom, at the twin bed that had never been replaced with something more adult, at the walls that had witnessed so many nights of quiet desperation. I closed the door without regret. I left a note on the kitchen table, simple and direct: "I've moved out. I'll call in a few days." Sarah. As I backed out of the driveway, I half expected to feel overwhelming guilt or fear. Instead, a strange sense of peace settled over me, as if I were finally aligning with a truth my soul had known for years. Linda was waiting when I arrived at her apartment building, helping me carry my meager belongings up to her second-floor unit. Her spare room was small but bright, with a window overlooking a courtyard where residents gathered on warm evenings. "It's not much," she said, setting down a box of kitchenware. "It's perfect," I replied, meaning it. This room, temporary as it might be, represented something I hadn't had in 17 years: choice. That evening, Linda and I sat on her small balcony, drinking wine and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone had been buzzing relentlessly, texts and calls from my mother, father, even the twins, but I left it on silent. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with their reactions. "How do you feel?" Linda asked, refilling my glass. I considered the question carefully. Scared. Relieved. Guilty. Free. All of it at once. She nodded. "That sounds about right. What if I'm making a mistake?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Linda turned to face me fully, her expression serious. "Look, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Starting over at our age rarely is. But ask yourself this: when you're 80 and looking back, which would you regret more, taking this chance or spending another 20 years putting everyone else first?" The answer was obvious. I raised my glass, a smile tugging at my lips. To new beginnings. Even the terrifying ones. The next morning, I woke in an unfamiliar bed, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous day came rushing back. I had done it. I had actually left. My phone showed 27 missed calls and 16 text messages. With a deep breath, I opened the most recent text from my mother: "Where are you? We're worried sick. Call immediately." I knew I couldn't avoid them forever, but I needed time to gather my strength, to shore up my resolve before the inevitable confrontation. I texted back: "I'm safe. I need some time. I'll call tomorrow." Her response was immediate: "This is ridiculous. Come home now." I turned off my phone and spent the day helping Linda around her apartment, cooking dinner as a thank you, and researching affordable studio apartments in the area. The simple act of looking at potential homes of my own filled me with a nervous excitement I hadn't felt in years. The next day, I prepared myself for the hardest phone call of my life. Linda squeezed my shoulder in silent support before leaving for her shift at the restaurant, giving me privacy. When I finally called, my mother answered on the first ring. "Sarah? Where are you? What is going on?" Her voice was shrill with a mixture of anger and panic. "I've moved out, Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I'm staying with a friend while I look for my own place." "Moved out? What are you talking about? This is your home." "No, Mom. It's your home. I've been a guest who pays most of the bills and does all the work." There was a shocked silence, then my father's voice came on the line. They must have put me on speaker. "Sarah, this is nonsense. Whatever misunderstanding has happened, we can talk about it when you get home." "It's not a misunderstanding, Dad. I've given this family 17 years of my life, my entire salary, and all of my time. I put my dreams on hold when Mom got sick, and somehow that turned into putting them away forever. I'm 45 years old, and it's time I lived my own life." "Is this about the twins' gifts?" Mom asked. "Because if you're jealous, it's not jealousy," I cut in, though the birthday dinner had certainly been the catalyst. "It's about fairness. It's about the fact that for 17 years, I've been treated like an employee, not a daughter. An employee who doesn't get days off, vacations, or even keep her own paycheck. We're your family. Dad's voice rose. Family helps family. We needed you. And what about what I needed? My voice broke slightly. Did anyone ever ask me what I wanted? Did anyone notice when I gave up culinary school? When I worked 2 jobs? When I spent every weekend cleaning a house that 3 other adults live in? You're being selfish, Mom said coldly. After everything we've done for you. The word hung in the air between us. Selfish. The ultimate accusation, the one that had kept me in line for nearly 2 decades. Maybe I am, I finally replied, a strange calm settling over me. Maybe, after 17 years of putting everyone else first, I've earned the right to be a little selfish. The house is a mess, my mother said, changing tactics. Your father needs help with his medication. The twins are busy with their careers. We need you here. I closed my eyes, steeling myself against the familiar pull of obligation. You all managed fine while I was working evenings at the restaurant. You'll figure it out. So that's it? Dad's voice was incredulous. You're just abandoning your family? I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just not sacrificing my entire life anymore. I'll call again in a few days when everyone's had time to think. I hung up before they could respond, my hands shaking but my resolve intact. It was done. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen myself. Joseph welcomed me back to work with a nod of understanding when I explained my situation. Family, he said, shaking his head. Complicated, always. But you made the right choice, Sarah. Now, about those weekend specials. The next month passed in a blur of apartment hunting, extra shifts at the restaurant, and increasingly manipulative calls from my parents. The twins reached out too. Michael seemed genuinely confused by my decision, while Jessica oscillated between guilt-tripping me and asking if I could still help her prepare for a dinner party she was hosting. Linda proved an invaluable support, offering advice from her own experience rebuilding her life after divorce. The guilt is the hardest part, she told me one evening as we prepared dinner together. They know exactly which buttons to push because they installed them. I finally found a small studio apartment I could afford, a 3rd-floor walk-up in an older building with a tiny kitchen but good natural light. The landlord, impressed by my steady job at a respected restaurant, approved my application despite my limited rental history. Moving day was both terrifying and exhilarating. My new home was small, but every inch of it was mine. I arranged my cookbooks on the single bookshelf, set up my bed beneath the window, and unpacked my kitchen equipment with the care others might reserve for fine china. That night, I stood in the center of my apartment, and felt the weight of decades lift from my shoulders. At 45, I was starting over. At 45, I was finally beginning. The final confrontation, a month into my new life, Joseph called me into his office after the lunch rush. I entered with the lingering anxiety that meetings still provoked in me, half expecting to be reprimanded despite consistently positive feedback on my weekend specials. Sit down, Sarah, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. He studied me for a moment, his experienced chef's eyes missing nothing. You look different these days. I shifted in my seat. Different how? More present. More confident. He leaned back in his chair. Your risotto special last weekend sold out by 8 o'clock. Customers have been asking when it will be on the menu again. A flush of pride warmed my cheeks. I was thinking of doing a variation this weekend, maybe with saffron and seafood. Joseph nodded approvingly. Good. But that's not why I called you in. He slid a brochure across the desk. The community college is offering an advanced culinary certification program. 6 months, weekends and 2 evenings a week. I've already spoken to them about you. I picked up the brochure, my heart quickening. I don't understand. I'm offering to sponsor you, Joseph said simply. You have talent, Sarah. Real talent. With proper training, you could be running your own kitchen someday. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Joseph's expression softened. It's never too late to become what you might have been. I left his office clutching the brochure, a future I'd thought forever lost suddenly possible again. The timing was perfect. I was settled in my apartment, adjusting to independence, ready for a new challenge. I was still floating on this cloud of possibility when I exited the restaurant that evening and found my parents waiting by my car. My step faltered. They looked oddly out of place against the brick wall of the alley where staff parked, my mother in her carefully coordinated outfit, my father standing stiffly with his hands clasped behind his back as if attending a business meeting. Mom? Dad? What are you doing here? My mother stepped forward, her expression a practiced blend of concern and reproach that I recognized from countless family disagreements. We've been trying to reach you for days, Sarah. You haven't been answering our calls. I've been busy, I said, my fingers tightening around the brochure in my pocket. Setting up my apartment, working extra shifts. Too busy for your family? My father asked, his tone carrying that familiar note of judgment. The family that raised you? I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I was no longer the girl who would buckle under that tone. What do you need? Is someone sick? We need to talk, Mom said, glancing around the alley with distaste. Not here. Come home with us. The word home triggered a complex rush of emotions, nostalgia, obligation, and a new, fierce protectiveness toward the independence I'd fought so hard to claim. I can meet you for coffee tomorrow, I offered. I have plans tonight. It wasn't entirely true, but the thought of being back in that house, surrounded by the weight of expectations, made my chest tighten uncomfortably. My father frowned. Plans? With who? With myself, I said simply. It's been a long day, and I have an early shift tomorrow. My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a confidence. Sarah, things at home, they're not going well. Your father's arthritis is worse. The house is a mess. Jessica and Michael are both so busy with their careers now, and whose fault is that? The words escaped before I could stop them. She blinked, genuinely confused. What do you mean? You raised them to focus on themselves, to expect others to handle the everyday responsibilities. You raised me to be the opposite. And now you're surprised that they won't step up? That's not fair, Dad interjected. We raised all of you the same. The absurdity of his statement almost made me laugh. No, Dad. You didn't. From the time I was 28, I was expected to put the family's needs before my own. I gave up my education, my career opportunities, even basic things like new clothes or a car that wasn't falling apart. Meanwhile, Jessica and Michael had every advantage. They had different paths, Mom said dismissively. Different talents. Different expectations, I corrected. They were allowed to pursue their dreams. I wasn't. My mother's expression hardened. We need you to come home, Sarah. The family needs you. There it was, the familiar appeal to duty, to obligation. For most of my adult life, those words would have been enough to bend me to their will. But not anymore. No, I said, the single word carrying the weight of 17 years of suppressed refusal. No? Dad repeated, as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. No, I confirmed, straightening my shoulders. I'm not coming back. Not to live, not to clean, not to cook. I've started building my own life and I'm not giving it up. After everything we've done for you? Mom's voice rose. This is how you repay us? What exactly have you done for me? The question was genuine, not rhetorical. Besides, expect me to sacrifice everything while giving nothing in return? We gave you a home. Dad exclaimed. A home where I worked as an unpaid housekeeper and contributed most of my salary, I pointed out. That's not giving, Dad. That's taking. My mother's face flushed with anger. You always were selfish at heart. We just didn't want to see it. The accusation stung, but not as much as it once would have. If recognizing my own worth is selfish, then yes, I guess I am. The twins' education, Dad began, is not my responsibility, I finished for him. They're 28, the same age I was when I gave up everything to help this family. If they want to pursue further education, they can do what other adults do, get loans, work part-time, make sacrifices. It's not the same, Mom insisted. Why not? I asked, genuinely curious about how she justified the disparity. Because, she faltered, then rallied. Because they have real potential. Real futures ahead of them. The truth, finally spoken aloud. The pain was swift but clarifying, like lancing a long festering wound. And I don't? My voice was quiet. An uncomfortable silence fell between us. My father looked away, unable to meet my eyes. My mother's expression flickered between defiance and a dawning awareness that she had revealed too much. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Joseph's brochure. My boss is sponsoring me for a culinary certification program. In 6 months, I could be an assistant chef. In a few years, I might run my own kitchen. I held it up like evidence. This is my potential. This is my future. The one I should have been pursuing for the past 17 years. My mother's eyes narrowed as she scanned the brochure. More cooking classes? At your age? The dismissal in her tone would have crushed me once. Now it only strengthened my resolve. Yes, at my age. It's not too late to become who I was meant to be. I moved past them to my car, unlocking the door with steady hands. I have to go. I'm meeting a friend for dinner. Another small untruth, but one that served the necessary boundary I was establishing. Sarah, my father called as I opened the car door. This isn't over. The family needs to discuss this situation further. I paused, one foot already inside the car. I'm willing to have a conversation, as equals. Not as the designated family servant. If you want to talk about building a healthier relationship moving forward, I'm open to that. But my decision to live independently is final. As I drove away, I watched them shrink in my rearview mirror, 2 aging figures standing in the alley, looking somehow diminished. For the first time, I saw them not as the all-powerful parents of my childhood, but as flawed individuals who had made choices that hurt one of their children while favoring the others. The realization brought not satisfaction but a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for what our relationship could have been, relief that I had finally broken free of the unequal dynamic that had defined it for so long. That evening, alone in my small apartment, I spread the culinary program materials across my kitchen counter. The course schedule, the list of required equipment, the sample recipes, each page represented a future I was finally allowed to claim. I ran my fingers over the glossy photos of chefs in professional kitchens, imagining myself among them. At 45, I would be older than most of my classmates, but that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I was moving forward at last. My phone rang, the screen displaying Jessica's name. I hesitated, then answered. Sarah? My sister's voice sounded uncertain, smaller than usual. I just talked to Mom and Dad. I figured you would, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. They said you refused to come home. That you were being, she hesitated, difficult. I almost laughed at the euphemism. Is that what they called it? They're really upset, Sarah. A note of accusation crept into her voice. Dad's arthritis is worse, and Mom says the house is falling apart without you there. It's been over a month, Jessica. They're adults. They can figure out how to run a household. But they're not young anymore, she protested. And Michael and I are so busy with our careers. I was busy too, I cut in. I had dreams, plans, opportunities. But I put them aside because the family needed me. No one ever asked if I needed something too. There was a long pause before Jessica spoke again, her voice quieter. I never thought about it that way. No one did. That was the problem. But what am I supposed to do? I'm starting my MBA program next month. I can't just drop everything to take care of the house. The irony was so thick I could almost touch it. Why not? I did. Another silence, longer this time. When Jessica finally spoke, her voice had lost its entitled edge. I don't know how to do what you did, Sarah. All the cooking and organizing and everything. You learn, I said simply. Or you hire someone. Or mom and dad downsize to a place they can manage. There are options that don't involve exploiting your older sister. We never meant to exploit you, she said, a hint of defensiveness returning. Intention doesn't change impact, Jess. The fact is, for 17 years, I gave up my life to support this family, while you and Michael were encouraged to focus on yourselves. That's not right, and it's not going to continue. I could almost hear her processing this perspective, so different from the family narrative she'd grown up with. What if, she started, then paused. What if Michael and I helped more? We could create a schedule, take turns with the cooking and cleaning. Would you consider coming back then? The fact that her first instinct was still to find a way to bring me back into the fold rather than acknowledge my right to independence spoke volumes. No, Jessica. I've moved on. I have my own place now, my own life. I'm starting culinary certification courses next month. This isn't about getting you and Michael to do more chores, it's about me finally putting myself first after years of being last. Oh. She sounded genuinely surprised, as if the concept of me having my own life goals was novel. Well, congratulations on the certification thing. That sounds nice. It wasn't enthusiastic support, but it was something, the first crack in the family's united front against my independence. Thanks, I said. Listen, I'm not cutting off contact with the family. I'm just establishing boundaries. I'm happy to visit for dinner sometimes, or meet for coffee. I'm just not going to be the family caretaker anymore. After we hung up, I stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the city lights. The conversation with Jessica had been difficult but necessary, the first of many as I reconstructed my relationship with my family on new, healthier terms. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda, still on for brunch Sunday? Joseph says he wants your input on the new menu. I smiled as I texted back my confirmation. These were the relationships I was nurturing now, equal ones, built on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in years, the culinary program brochure on my nightstand a tangible reminder that at 45, my life wasn't ending. It was finally beginning. Epilogue 6 months later, 6 months into my new life, I barely recognized the person I had been. My small studio apartment had transformed from a bare-bones refuge into a true home. Herb plants lined the windowsill, catching the morning light. Colorful cooking utensils hung from a rack I'd installed myself. Postcards from local restaurants and food festivals created a collage on one wall, my vision board of culinary possibilities. Joseph's culinary certification program had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Beyond the technical skills, knife techniques, sauce foundations, flavor profiles, it had given me a community. For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by people who shared my passion, who saw food as both art and comfort. Taste this, I said to Linda, who sat at my small kitchen counter one Sunday afternoon. I handed her a spoon of risotto, watching anxiously as she sampled it. Too much saffron? Linda closed her eyes, savoring the bite. It's perfect. Subtle but distinctive. She opened her eyes, smiling. Joseph's going to love it. I was preparing for my final practical exam, a 3-course meal that would demonstrate everything I'd learned. Joseph had promised that if I passed with distinction, he would promote me to assistant chef with a significant raise. I can't believe I'm doing this, I said, stirring the risotto gently. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still in that house, that this has all been a dream. Linda nodded, understanding in her eyes. Freedom takes some getting used to. My phone buzzed with a text. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. Dinner at 6 tomorrow? Michael's cooking. Nothing fancy, but he's trying. I smiled, showing Linda the message. Progress, I said. Slow, but real. The past 6 months had brought gradual changes in my family dynamics. After our confrontation in the alley, my parents had maintained a chilly distance for several weeks. Then reality set in. The house really was falling apart without me there. Rather than hiring help, as I'd suggested, they'd turned to the twins. Jessica and Michael's initial resistance had given way to a grudging acceptance of their new responsibilities. The first time I visited for dinner, 3 months after moving out, I'd been shocked to find Michael at the stove, awkwardly following a recipe he'd found online. It's edible, he warned as we sat down to slightly overcooked pasta. Barely. The meal had been tense but civil. My mother still made pointed remarks about how much easier things had been before, but my father surprised me by asking about my culinary courses with what seemed like genuine interest. Always knew you had a knack for cooking, he'd said, as if my talent had been nurtured rather than exploited all those years. Now, 6 months on, we were establishing a new kind of relationship, not the close-knit family bond my mother still occasionally mourned, but something more balanced, more respectful. I visited once or twice a month for dinner, brought dishes from my culinary classes, and left at a reasonable hour without being enlisted for dishes or laundry or next week's meal prep. Are you going? Linda asked, nodding at Jessica's text. I think so, I replied, texting a confirmation. Michael's cooking is still pretty terrible. But he's learning. Linda laughed. Just like my ex when we first divorced. The man couldn't boil water. Now he makes decent meals for the kids on his weekends. I turned back to my risotto, adding a splash of white wine. It's strange. I resented them for so long, not just my parents, but Jessica and Michael too. Now I mostly feel. I don't know. Sad for the time we lost. That's growth, Linda said, slipping off her stool to refill her coffee cup. Resentment keeps you tied to the past. Moving forward means letting it go, not for them, but for you. The wisdom of her words settled over me like a comfortable blanket. At 45, I was learning lessons I should have grasped decades earlier, about boundaries, about self-worth, about the difference between love and obligation. Joseph mentioned something interesting yesterday, I said, changing the subject as I plated the risotto for Linda to photograph. We'd started an Instagram account documenting my culinary journey, another small act of self-expression that would have seemed unthinkable a year ago. Oh. Linda held up her phone, angling for the best light. The owner of that new cafe on Maple Street, Harvest Table? They're looking for a chef to develop their dinner menu. Joseph recommended me. Linda lowered her phone, eyes wide. Sarah. That's incredible. It's just a consultation at this point, I said, trying to temper my excitement. But if they like my ideas, it could turn into something more permanent. Your own menu, Linda marveled. Your own restaurant kitchen. The possibility sent a thrill through me, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed myself capable of such an opportunity. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed myself deserving of it. One step at a time, I said, but I couldn't suppress my smile. First, I need to pass this certification. Later that evening, after Linda had gone home and my apartment had settled into Sunday night quietness, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk descended. My certification materials lay spread across the coffee table, notes and recipes carefully organized for my final week of preparation. My phone rang, my mother's number. I hesitated only briefly before answering. "Hello?" "Sarah." My mother's voice carried its usual blend of authority and martyrdom, though somewhat muted compared to months past. "I wanted to remind you about Jessica's work presentation on Thursday. The whole family is attending for support." I took a slow breath. These reminders, as if I were still the forgetful child who needed managing, were one of the remaining friction points in our evolving relationship. "Mom, I told Jessica last week that I can't make it. I have my certification exam that evening." A familiar, weighted silence. "Then, can't you reschedule?" "Family should come first, Sarah." 6 months ago, that statement would have triggered an immediate surge of guilt and defensiveness. Now, I recognized it for what it was, an attempt to reimpose old patterns, old priorities. "My certification is important to me," I said calmly. "Jessica understands. We're having lunch the next day so she can tell me all about how it went." "Well," my mother huffed, clearly dissatisfied but finding no foothold for further argument. "I suppose that will have to do." "It will," I agreed, my tone gentle but firm. "Was there anything else?" Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice carried an unfamiliar note, something close to uncertainty. "Your father and I were thinking of coming to that restaurant of yours sometime. To see what you do there." I nearly dropped my tea. In all the years I'd worked at Mezzanot, my parents had never once visited. The restaurant, my passion, my growing expertise, had existed outside their concept of what mattered. "That would be nice," I said, recovering. "Let me know when, and I'll make sure Joseph knows you're coming." "We're proud of you, you know," she added awkwardly. "Your father says you always had a good head for cooking." The belated acknowledgement wasn't quite an apology for years of dismissing my dreams, but it was something, a small recognition that perhaps they had been wrong about what I could become. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." After we hung up, I returned to the window, watching a plane's lights track slowly across the darkening sky. At 45, I was neither young nor old, neither starting from scratch nor fully established. I was somewhere in between, building on foundations I'd laid for myself these past 6 months, creating a future from the fragments of long-deferred dreams. I gathered my certification materials, reviewing my final preparation checklist for the week ahead. Tomorrow would bring dinner at my parents' house, with Michael's questionable cooking. Tuesday was my last class. Thursday, the certification exam. Friday, the consultation at harvest table. My life was full in a way it had never been before, full of possibilities, challenges, relationships based on choice rather than obligation. The path ahead wasn't clear or certain, but it was mine to choose, mine to walk at my own pace. I glanced around my small apartment, at the cookbooks arranged by cuisine type, at the potted herbs thriving in the window light, at the second-hand furniture I'd selected piece by piece. Not much to show for 45 years, perhaps. But as I took it all in, a smile spread across my face. I felt free.